Every day, a deadly war ensues, one that's been going on for centuries. Only a few know it exists, but 37-year-old Michael Rockholm claimed to know of it, having devastatingly experienced it firsthand. For years, he wouldn't talk about what happened. He finally broke his silence after it started happening to his own son at the exact same age as it started happening to him. This is a story he told FBI Special Agent Bill Maddox in 1998. Maddox was part of a small task force who also knows what Michael knows. It began in Crescent City, California, when I was a mere 8.5 years old. The nightmares began as such, just nightmares, but over the months and years they progressively morphed into something you couldn't possibly fathom. I was your average, happy, somewhat wild, blonde haired boy the day I turned 8. 6 months later, though, something visited me in my dreams that took my life in a dark and disturbing turn, and I was never the same. The year was 1969 and my first day of third grade. There were two new students in school that year, and both were in my class. One was a good looking girl with long blonde hair who would always smile at me throughout the day. Her name was Lori. The other one, a boy named Seth, who seemed to be the complete opposite, with black hair and an expression that'd scare even the bravest adult. I did notice when Lori would look at him, her expression would go from pleasant to that of contempt in an instant. He also seemed to be sneering every time he'd look at her. I wondered if they knew each other, but when the teacher introduced them, they were from completely different states. Lori was from Arizona and Seth from Indiana. I still remember the very first nightmare and the last nightmare vividly. The day before the first nightmare was an unusual day. Seth seemed to be more hostile to Lori than usual, and strange things happened at recess. That day, one of my classmates fell off the tall slide, breaking her arm, which left the bone protruding from the skin, and another classmate broke his jaw playing basketball, which caused him to bite off half of his tongue. There was blood everywhere, a long thick trail of it from the playground all the way through the hallway leading to the bathroom. That was the first time I saw an ambulance up close, but certainly not the last. Since I was young, I'd always shared a bunk bed with my older brother, with me being on top. I was always a wild sleeper, sometimes waking up with my feet on the pillow and my head at the end of the bed. That night, though, I woke up on the floor next to a barf bucket, which I'd thrown up in, with my mother cradling my head and a concussion. Before tumbling off the bed, I dreamt I was in a world of pure chaos, worse than hell, if there is such a thing. Horrible, unspeakable things were happening to everyone around me, and all I could do was stand there helplessly watching as people screamed, "Kill me! Let me die!" The screams suddenly became so loud and intense I could see and feel the vibrations on my arms as everything seemed to shake. When I looked up, I saw Seth was coming at me with a look on his face that shook me to my core and still does to this day. People were running to get out of his way, and when he was inches away, Lori suddenly came out of nowhere, her arms stretched out as she wrapped them around him. I was sent flying back as I was jolted awake, staring up at my mom's face. She was consoling me while the rest of my family was huddled around with worried looks, talking about whether or not to call an ambulance. They instead called our family doctor, who told my parents to stay home but to keep an eye on me in case my condition worsened. My mom kept me awake the rest of the night, allowing me to sleep once it was morning. When I woke up that afternoon, all I could think about was the nightmare. Never before had a dream felt so real. The worst dream of my life up to that point. I can still hear the sounds, and the pungent smell lingered in my nose for days. The next morning at school, when I saw Lori walk into class, she gave me a strange but comforting look, like she knew what had happened and didn't need to say it. After she sat down, I was anxious and nervous to see how Seth would act, but he never came that day. During recess, I'd catch Lori staring at me, and I'd quickly look away, being awkward and shy back then when it came to girls. That night, I had another nightmare, only this time Seth was on the ground getting beaten in the face by a dark figure. The area around them was shrouded in darkness, and I couldn't see the face of the figure because their back was turned to me. My desk was at the front of the class, right by the door, so I was the first person my classmates would see when they entered. The following morning, I was looking down, writing my name on a piece of paper the teacher had just handed out, when I noticed two black leather shoes come into view, right in front of my desk. I looked up to see Seth standing there, glaring at me, like he wanted to kill me. I almost gasped as I could see he had a black eye and a gash on his cheek that had been sewn shut with stitches. His eyes continued burning a hole through me until the teacher finally told him to take his seat. As he walked over, I glanced back at Lori and could see she had her eyes fixated on him with a smirk on her face. I quickly turned back around before she could catch me looking at her. That day felt different, and not in a good way. It was like our classroom had suddenly been wrapped in a form of darkness that could be felt. Everyone seemed angry and on edge with each other. Everyone except Lori and me, even though I could still feel it. The next 3 nights, I had the same nightmare I'd had the first night, where Seth would be coming at me, but Lori would stop him before he could reach me. It wasn't until the fourth night the nightmare completely changed, becoming reality. The dream started out with me sitting alone in the classroom. I then heard giggling behind me, so I quickly turned around to see Seth sitting at the very back corner desk. He raised his arm and pointed to the front as he smiled. I turned around just in time to see our teacher, Miss Gunther, raise the blade on the paper guillotine with one hand, then swing it down very hard on her other arm, cutting it off. She said nothing as she collapsed onto the guillotine. I jumped up with such force I almost fell off the bed again, gasping loudly for air, loud enough to wake up my older brother, Mark, who yelled at me to be quiet and go back to sleep. The following morning, I woke up feeling empty, like I wasn't me. It was like someone had reached in and taken my soul. I was somber and silent as I rode the bus to school. When I got to class, I took my seat and stared at the wall. An hour went by, and all I could hear was Miss Gunther murmuring as she walked around teaching the class and writing on the chalkboard. Recess was the same. I stood outside staring at the red brick wall. I was me, but wasn't me. It's hard to put into words. When we came back and sat down, I saw Miss Gunther reach down and pick up the paper guillotine off the floor and put it on the table next to her desk. I knew something horrible was about to happen, but could do nothing. As I watched her raise the blade, put her arm under it, then swing it down with such force it completely sliced off her arm. Then, just like my dream, she collapsed onto the table as everyone shrieked out in horror. Pandemonium ensued as a classroom filled with people. Teachers quickly huddled around her, trying to stop the bleeding, tying a tourniquet, I imagine. I'm not exactly sure, as I, along with Lori, never moved from our desks. Seth, however, was standing near the crowd, grinning. Shortly after, an ambulance arrived, taking her to the hospital. I never saw her again. It was rumored she moved back to her home state to live with her parents. The nightmares continued every night, and the only person I ever told was my older brother, and I'm sure he didn't believe me. Most of the nightmares were the same as the first one, but every now and then I'd have one about a classmate or someone in town. And just like Miss Gunther, whatever happened in my dream happened for real the next day or within a few days. There was no way to predict when exactly. Several months had gone by, and I still hadn't said one word to Lori. One day, while I was eating lunch by myself, she came and sat down by me. She then proceeded to tell me the most disturbing and craziest story I've ever heard or will ever hear. Before speaking, though, she looked me in the eyes, smiled, and said, "I had to wait until you fully believed what you were dreaming at night was actually real, before I could divulge what I'm about to tell you." Some people go their entire lives dismissing it as nothing more than nightmares. That is until it happens to them or someone close to them, but then it's too late. You see, Seth and me were born into the wrong world, or dimension as some call it. On purpose or by accident, I don't know. What I do know and what I've been told is Seth comes from a place of pure chaos. We call the people there children of death, because they literally are born from death. They bring with them nothing but pain, destruction, and of course death. They spread it like a disease. People like me come from a place that is opposite of Seth, I believe sent to balance the scales. This place we're in, the place you were born, we call the neutral. Children of death come here because they cannot go to where I'm from. They're all around us all the time, and some are much more evil than others. The ones who know where they're from are by far the worst. Everyone knows them as the evilest men in history, but no one knows why exactly. Now you do. Every night I enter his world trying to stop him, but there's only so much ones like me can do. Their numbers far outweigh us, but their destruction would be far worse if we weren't here. You go there too, every night since your nightmares began. "Why do I go there? What does he want?" I asked. "He wants you." If he's able to get a hold of you in the nightmare, it will set off a chain of unspeakable events. There's something he sees in you, something he wants, she replied. Why me, though? I asked. You must have something he can use, as they're always trying to increase their strength in numbers. Since this world is neutral, people here can sway either way, and unfortunately, he will only get stronger as he gets older, she replied. After she finished that sentence, one of our classmates came and sat down next to us, so we stopped talking about it. As I sat there finishing my lunch, it felt like my entire sense of reality had been crushed. I also thought the way she spoke was much older than her actual age. She was more like an adult than an 8-year-old. When I stood up to take my tray back, I locked eyes with Seth from across the lunchroom. I frantically looked away because, to be honest, at the time I was extremely frightened of him and wasn't sure what he was capable of. The rest of the day, I was deep in thought, wondering if things around me were going to get worse. I played out all kinds of horrific scenarios in my head, and her saying she can only do so much left me feeling helpless. It wasn't as if I could tell anyone either, because who the hell would believe me? Over the next several years, I'd have the same dream almost every night, with Seth coming at me and Lori always saving me at the last second. We continued growing up and attending the same school but in different classes. Lori and me became much closer, almost best friends, I'd say. People in town continued getting maimed in unexplainable, horrific ways, with several people brutally dying. It wasn't until shortly after my 12th birthday the unthinkable happened. For some reason, I remember it was Thursday night, and instead of my usual nightmare, this one took a grave turn, which I'd learned from past nightmares it's going to happen the following day or within a few days. This time, however, it involved my family. As I laid my head back down on the pillow, despair set in, as I wasn't sure what to do. Of course, I planned on telling Lori at school the next day, but what could either of us do? She said she can only intervene in dreams. I could take Seth out, which might only worsen things for me. Believe me, we talked about it many times. When I told her about the nightmare, she looked like someone kicked her in the gut. She was silent for several minutes before saying, "We can end Seth, but even so it might be too late. Once you see it in your dreams, it's already set in motion." Tears streamed down my cheeks as I figured she was going to say that, but was hoping she wouldn't. "We have to try and warn them. I can't just sit idle and let it happen," I responded, trying to compose myself. "Yes, of course, but you know as well as I do they won't believe us," she replied. "I know, and I don't care. If you're there backing me up, there's a slight chance they may," I said. She said nothing, just looked at me with sympathy in her eyes. We'd always walked home together, so it didn't need to be said, but she'd come to my house and hopefully convince my parents of the danger that lay ahead. School that day was a complete blur, because I was anxious to leave, so when the bell rang, I ran to meet her out behind the woodshop class. We didn't say much as we walked home. My brother and sister usually got home before me since they were older and went to a different school, so I expected them to be there along with my mother. But my father usually arrived about 2 hours later than the rest of us. As we turned the corner and my house came into view, I was surprised to see my dad's truck parked outside. It's happened before, so it's not out of the question, but given the circumstances, this made me nervous. Lori noticed also, giving me a grim look as I stopped walking, and I'm sure she could see the fear in my eyes. She put her hand on my shoulder and said, "We have to go check." I simply nodded my head. When we made it to the front yard, for some reason I whispered, "Let's go through the back door." "All right," she said, grabbing me by the hand, leading the way. As we walked around the side of the house, the shed came into view, and I could see the door was wide open, which was unusual. The only time it'd be open is if one of us was mowing the lawn or doing yard work, and that only happened on Saturdays or Sundays. I didn't mention it as we made our way to the back door steps. My foot felt like a lead weight as I tried lifting it onto the first step. If she wasn't there, I'm not sure I'd have the courage to move forward. When we made it to the door, I hesitated until she finally reached out and opened it. As the door swung open, a strong metallic odor hit us. I'd smelled it before, but couldn't place it. She went in first, leading me as she continued holding my hand. It was eerily silent as we stepped into the kitchen. which I instantly knew was not right. They were always gathered there after school, eating or drinking something, or at the very least, they'd be talking in the living room. I was about to call out to them when she hurriedly put her finger up to her mouth, indicating to me to be quiet. She pointed to the bedrooms as we quietly made our way down the hallway. Our rooms were first before my parents' room, and I was fully expecting to find my brother or sister in them, but they were empty. The walk to my parents' room was the longest, most dreadful walk of my life. Each step felt like my feet were glued to the floor. Before turning the corner to their room, Lori looked at me and nodded. I did nothing, just let her continue to lead. What we saw next is something I still see every time I close my eyes. My father was sitting on the bed, his head down, holding a hacksaw in his hands, as my mother, sister, and brother lay next to each other on the bed, covered in blood. Blood was everywhere in the room, and it was then I remembered what the metallic smell was. Neither of us could move, but knew we needed to. My father slowly raised his head and looked at us. His face was like stone, drained of any semblance of himself as he said, "Hello, Michael." Without warning, Lori squeezed my hand really hard, turned and ran down the hallway as fast as she could with me in tow. We bolted out the back door as it was still open, then ran down the street until we found some neighbors outside. The sheriff's department was immediately called while we stayed inside the neighbor's house, sitting there in a state of disbelief. It's weird, but all I could think about was Seth's face and getting revenge. I could tell Lori knew exactly what I was thinking. An hour later, the sheriff came to the house to question us. He took me to another room and let me know my father had taken his own life before they arrived. When we came out of the room, Lori was nowhere to be found. I assumed she'd gone home, but later that night, she came to visit me at the sheriff's office, where I was staying until my relatives arrived. Before I could say anything, she said, "I went to find Seth so I could deal with him in my own way, even if it meant I'd get severely punished for intervening. Luckily for him, he wasn't there, and I suspect he'll never come back." "What do we do now?" I asked softly, still in shock. "Find him and make him pay," she replied in a tone I'd never heard from her before and never have again. "We've been searching for him ever since. That is, until our son started having the nightmares. Now our focus is finding the one giving our son the nightmares, and when I do, I'll deal with him my way." For more scary horror stories, please subscribe.